Hopefully, you just came up with some great ideas for connecting reading and writing in your classroom. If you go back to that first slide, we learned about why we want to teach writing, and we find that it's connected to reading so much. So these activities that you brainstormed and the ideas I'm going to share on this slide are so valuable to our students because it allows them the opportunity to see reading and writing together for varieties of purposes and gives them many chances during the day to read and write. So some of the ideas I have that I used in my own classroom. First of all, we had pen pals. We had pen pals with my sister's first grade class and also my mother's first grade class at one point, and they wrote letters back and forth. We started in February because that's, I don't know, Valentine's Day for me triggers letter writing. So in January and February, we learned how to write letters, and then from that point in the school year to the end of the year, we wrote back and forth to our pen pals. Every child had their own pen pal in the classroom. Once in a while, the numbers don't match up, and you have to have two kiddos write to one student or something, but it all works out. And we weren't allowed to have a field trip, but we met virtually through some Skype sessions, and they got to see each other. We sent photos with parent permission, and we also had an activity at the end of the school year where we met at a playground between York and Lancaster. And that was voluntary, but I had 100% participation for mine. It was just for fun. And pen pals are fun. It gives you a different purpose. It makes a new friend. It allows you someone to write to and get mail. It's so much fun to get mail. So pen pals, and I know some classrooms, they do email pals as well because most classrooms have students that have their own email address within the school district. So email pals are another possibility. In my classroom, we had a class newspaper that was published. They had a lot of fun doing that. We also made podcasts when we were learning something new, and we shared those podcasts on my teacher website. I had an author of the week that we focused on, and we used that to model style. That wasn't every week, though. I had writing contests within my room, but I also advertised writing contests to my students and allowed them class time to work, and I had many winners that were featured in the newspaper, and that makes a big deal when the newspaper publishes your writing. We wrote our own readers' theaters. One of my favorite units was when we did Earth Day and talked about ways to make our Earth better, and all week we learned about ways to make our Earth better. And at the end of the week, I allowed them to choose one writing project. And they could either write a song about what they learned or trying to persuade people how to take care of the Earth. They could write a poem. They could write a story. They could write in a group, a reader's theater, or they could write a commercial. And then after they had written them, we performed them. So my songwriters got up in front of the classroom and we videoed them singing their songs. They could do it by themselves or they could work in groups of 2 or 3. My poets performed their poetry. My readers' theater groups performed their readers' theater. My commercials were videoed and we aired them just like they would be a real commercial. And my story writers shared their stories. But they had a great time. I actually think I had a group that made brochures as well that they could hand out. And we had parents come in for some of the things. But again, we have that reading-writing connection, and we want to share that writing is fun, and it's important, and it's purposeful. So that was one of my favorite weeks that showed that variety. We had puppet shows. Sometimes during reading workshop time, they would read a book they really liked, and I would allow them to make a puppet show to share the class and kind of be that book commercial, but in a puppet show format. Sometimes we wrote speeches or debates when we were trying to persuade someone about something. We had our author's tea, which I mentioned before, where at the end of the year, their published stories were read, and we had a little tea party. Buddy journals. We did interviews and wrote biographies about different people. Sometimes they did it about their grandparents. Sometimes they did it about their friends. We interviewed people outside of the school and within our school and wrote biographies about them. They can write their own autobiography and share it. Since we study authors all the time, we see lots of author autobiographies and biographies online, so they got into writing their own. We put those in the front of their published stories. Once they wrote their autobiographies, we put that in the actual story at the end. I the end or the beginning, I forget. And that way they understood that All About Me page that we see in a lot of books. We did research projects throughout the school year about a variety of topics, and we published things on our website that allowed them to do some of the writing. One of the fun things that I remember doing, we hatched butterflies in the spring, and I put them into groups to observe the butterflies. And throughout the month that we had them, different groups were reporters, and they would go and they would observe the butterflies. Then they would write out a script of what they saw, and then they would practice their lines, and they would read it like a newscast. And then we would put the podcast out on our teacher website and update what's going on with our butterflies. Some of my students like to write cartoons or graphic novels. Every week in my classroom, we had a student of the week who brought in pictures and items, and we would interview that student, and we would write a giant class story and then make a book of individual stories they had written about the student. Sometimes they reviewed TVs or movies that they had watched at home, and sometimes they reviewed songs or books that they had read. So again, lots of ideas for connecting reading and writing. These are the fun things. These are the things that motivate your reluctant writers to want to do more. And they'll find a niche that they really like and will stick with.